foreign travelers and to better ensure the health and safety of travelers. ASEAN has created safety and health protocols to reduce possible exposure to viruses and keep everyone healthy.
Fascinating.
First in our news, a regional special envoy to Myanmar on Thursday urged its junta to allow him to meet a shadow government it has branded terrorists in order to break a deadlock between the military and opponents of the coup. Cambodian Foreign Minister Prak Sokhonn, its new special envoy to the country, told a meeting of the bloc's foreign ministers he planned to visit in March and meet with top junta officials. He added a request to be allowed to meet with members of a national unity government dominated by lawmakers from Aung San Suu Kyi's ousted party that is working to overthrow the junta. The junta has declared the NUG terrorists and jailed several high-ranking members of Suu Kyi's party. Most NUG members are in exile or in hiding, and Prak Sokhonn gave no details on where or when any future meeting might take place or whether he had discussed his plans with the junta. The junta did not respond to a request for comment.
The UN Refugee Agency, or UNHCR, is stepping up its response to assist hundreds of thousands of internally displaced people, or IDPs, in Myanmar. According to the agency, the number of IDPs has now grown to 800,000, doubling since February last year. Take a look.
Security is deteriorating rapidly across the country as fighting and armed conflict intensifies with no sign of abating. UNHCR forecasts an accelerating trend in displacements in the coming weeks and months. Some 440,000 people have been newly displaced since February 2021, according to our data, adding to an existing 370,000 who had fled their homes previously. Humanitarian access in many parts of Myanmar remains restricted due to insecurity, roadblocks, and challenges in obtaining access approvals. As a result, host communities and local responders continue to play a leading role in assisting displaced populations, demonstrating solidarity with each other by donating what they can. Another conflict-affected area with pressing needs is Myanmar's northwest, where about 190,000 people remain displaced in Chin State, Magwai region, and Sagyang region.
Across the country, security is rapidly getting worse as fighting and armed conflict intensifies. Forecasting more displacement in the coming weeks and months, UNHCR is now working with partners to scale up operations. Most internally displaced people are dependent on humanitarian support for survival. In 2022, UNHCR said it requires a total of $56.7 million to ensure adequate humanitarian assistance and support to vulnerable communities.
The 600,000 stateless Rohingya living in Rakhine State also require more help. The Rohingya are a stateless Muslim minority in Myanmar. Let's watch this.
Some 600,000 stateless Rohingya in Rakhine State, including some 148,000 displaced in camps, villages, and displacement sites, also remain highly vulnerable and require humanitarian support.
In other news, President Rodrigo Duterte directed the Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, to conduct a follow-up prosecution after busting sellers of fake medicines and fly-by-night stores. Watch this.
Ang akin lang kasi, there must be follow-up sa prosecution para mahinto na to. Baka gawin lang ninyong pagkatapos ulit, tapos wala lang. O wala talaga mangyari dito sa mga batas na to. So, somebody, those 6 lawyers that you have, are better off assigned to keep the monitoring activities para maano nila kung na ano ba ito, na huli ba at na demanda ba. Very important na mademanda. Kasi that's the only way to discourage people selling fake medicines, even they are what you would call legit outlets.
Meanwhile, Department of Interior and Local Government Secretary Eduardo Año said they will support the FDA in its fight against fake drug selling. Duterte also urged the FDA to strengthen its coordination with police authorities such as National Bureau of Investigation or NBI and the Criminal Investigation and Detection Group or CIDG when making actions against the sellers of fake medicines.
Lack of interest for booster shots as well as challenges faced by some regions conducting the large-scale inoculation drive have contributed to the poor public reception for the third National Vaccination Days or NVD, according to the National Vaccination Operations Center. These factors, and VOC Chairman Myrna C. Cabotaje said, are now making it unlikely for them to reach their goal of administering 5 million COVID-19 jabs before the latest round of NVDs ends on Friday. Let's take a look.
Kailangan na paspasan pa. So baka hindi natin maabot yung ating 5 million na target nung 2 araw sana nung last week tapos in-extend natin. Medyo hindi pa ganun kabilis ang pagtanggap sa especially the booster. Nakikita nilang importante ito, pero kulang yung tinatawag na urgency. Hindi nila nakikita ang kailangan magpa-booster kaagad. So nakikita natin sa BARM, may problema tayo, lalo na ngayon na anong tawag dyan, nag-courtesy resignation at iba na ang chief minister ng BARM. So pumatak yan sa mga assistant, mga deputy nila. Tapos yung Region 12, no, tingnan natin, although nag-improve yung hesitancy, ibig sabihin bumaba na yung ating ayaw magpabakuna, kailangan isabihin sa kanila na dapat may urgency ng pagpabakuna. So, we are looking at Region 7, although nag-improve na after the Odette, tapos sa Region Region 8 and Region 5.
The third National Vaccination Day was originally scheduled to be held from February 10 and 11 only, but it was extended until Thursday to allow more people to avail themselves of COVID-19 vaccines. It is part of the government's measure to fully vaccinate 70 million people next month. As of February 16, 2022, Cabotaje said 61.9 million Filipinos are fully vaccinated against COVID-19, of which only 9.3 million got their booster shots.
The World Health Organization, or WHO, on Tuesday published a new easy-to-use guide on COVID-19 recommendations for pregnant women, including transgender men and other gender-diverse people who may have the capacity to become pregnant. Produced in a Q&A format, the recommendations include the vaccines which have been approved by WHO for emergency use, including while pregnant, which cover Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Janssen, Sinopharm, Sinovac, Coronavac, Bharat Biotech, and Novavax. All the vaccines are expected to work as well for pregnant women as those who aren't expecting. WHO acknowledged that although pregnant women were not included in the initial clinical trials of COVID-19 vaccines, evidence on their safety and effectiveness in preventing severe illness, hospitalization, and death during pregnancy has increased. And given the substantial risk from COVID-19 during pregnancy, WHO maintains that it is critical for pregnant women and those planning to become pregnant to have access to emergency listed COVID-19 vaccines as soon as they are available.
Thailand plans to reopen its borders with Malaysia to stimulate the economy. Here's Mr. Natapanu Nupakun, Deputy Director General of Thai Information Department, Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Coordination in the relationship with our neighboring countries. So in particular, the government's plan to reopen the southern border. So according to the deputy government spokesperson, the government is planning to reopen the Thailand-Malaysia border next month in March 2022 to stimulate tourism and the economy in the deep southern provinces. The Prime Minister has also ordered the CCSA and the Tourism EOC, or Tourism Emergency Operations Center, to prepare and outline the pandemic mitigation measures, in particular for the reopening of the southern border provinces in the checkpoints in the provinces of Songkhla, Yala, Narathiwat, and Satoon. And following the government's policy to open a travel bubble with Malaysia, tourists from neighboring countries will be allowed to enter through the test and go scheme with no quarantine upon arrival. However, visitors will still need to pass 2 RT-PCR tests after arriving in Thailand.
Thailand resumed its quarantine-free travel scheme from February 1st after the program was suspended due to the fast-spreading Omicron COVID-19 variant. Pandemic travel curbs have hammered the kingdom's tourism-dominated economy, sending visitor numbers dwindling to a trickle. Fully vaccinated travelers will now be able to enter under the Test and Go scheme as long as they take COVID tests on the 1st and 5th days after arriving.
Now let's go over to Vietnam, where the country will reopen to international tourists on March 15th after a 2-year border closure due to the pandemic. This is according to the government on Wednesday. The Southeast Asian nation of 97 million people largely closed itself in March 2020, a move that clobbered its burgeoning tourism sector, which was worth $32 billion a year before COVID. Authorities said in a statement Wednesday they could begin issuing visas and accepting foreign arrivals from the middle of next month. The announcement comes a day after the communist country lifted all restrictions on all international flights. The government has slowly eased pandemic curbs in recent months, with visitors trickling back in since November under a bubble arrangement to play golf at resorts. Tourists must be fully vaccinated and produce a negative coronavirus test before departure and upon arrival. The government statement said each traveler must also buy COVID-19 medical insurance coverage worth $10,000. It is unclear whether people entering Vietnam will have to abide by the country's 3-day quarantine rule in hotels or homes.
Bali began a tentative reopening to foreign tourists on Wednesday, with the first international passenger flight to the Indonesian holiday island in nearly 2 years. Let's take a look.
It is nice to be back.
Yeah.
It's really nice. I'm very, very happy. Yes, it is. And I'm coming for the 6th time or 7th time. So 2 years, no Bali was long time.
I think it's a great sign that, Bali's opening up, Indonesia's opening up. I read the news that apparently next week it'll be reduced even further. It's a great sign, and I'm mean, Bali needs it.
Saat ini memang regulasinya masih kalau yang kami terima regulasinya masih 5 hari bagi penumpang yang sudah vaksin lengkap, tetapi 7 hari bagi penumpang yang belum vaksin lengkap.
The resumption of flights comes as the Southeast Asian archipelago loosens quarantine rules even as it battles a surge in COVID cases fueled by the Omicron variant. A Singapore Airlines plane carrying 109 international travelers and 47 Indonesians landed in Bali on Wednesday, the island's Governor Wayan Koster told a press conference. The foreign visitors must stay in a quarantine bubble at one of 27 designated hotels for 3 to 7 days, depending on the number of vaccine doses received, according to new nationwide rules published Wednesday. Singapore Airlines said it will operate daily flights between the city-state and Bali to meet good demand. Other airlines, including Australia-based Jetstar Airways, could resume flights to the holiday hotspot as early as next month, according to Bali's Governor Wayan Koster. Bali authorities trialed a limited reopening in October for a group of select countries, but the response was tepid due to strict quarantine requirements and the absence of direct flights.
ASEAN is committed to welcoming travelers back to Southeast Asia region and to better ensure the health and safety of travelers. ASEAN has created safety health protocols to reduce possible exposure to viruses and to keep everyone healthy. Watch this.
Southeast Asia is excited to welcome you back. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, has developed common guidelines to promote hygiene and safety throughout our tourism industry, so that you can trust that your visit will not only be beautiful, fascinating, and warm, but safe and healthy too. Tourism businesses in 8 sectors, including hotels, restaurants, spas, fitness facilities, community-based tourism, tour operators, convention centers, and theme parks, are now implementing the common ASEAN guidelines on hygiene and safety. Entry to tourism businesses will include automatic temperature checks and no-touch hand sanitizer, because safeguarding your health couldn't be more important. Inside establishments, tourism professionals are implementing industry standard practices, including masking, disinfecting surfaces, social distancing, and more, to make your trip safe and enjoyable. Maintaining the safety of the guests and staff is our highest priority. Businesses that adhere to the guidelines may display the ASEAN Tourism Safe and Warm stamp, so you'll know you can trust them. Southeast Asia is ready, and we can't wait to see you.
And the news continues here in ASEAN in Focus. Crystal and I will be back right after this. Welcome back. The United Nations on Tuesday urged Singapore to halt the imminent executions of 2 men held for drug offenses and furthermore end its use of the death penalty altogether. The UN Rights Office voiced alarm at the case of Pausi Jeffredin and Roslan Bakar, who were both arrested in 2008 and convicted 2 years later on drug trafficking charges. Take a look.
We urge the government of Singapore to halt the imminent execution of 2 men who have been jailed over the past 14 years on drug offenses. Roslan bin Bakar and Pausi bin Jeffredin were arrested in 2008 and convicted in 2010 on charges of drug trafficking. The 2 men have remained on death row for the past 12 years and were reportedly informed only a week ago, on the 9th of February, of their imminent execution, which is scheduled for tomorrow, the 16th of February. There are also concerns that one or both of the men have intellectual disabilities. The use of the death penalty for drug-related offenses is incompatible with international human rights law. The death penalty can only be imposed for the most serious crimes, which is interpreted as crimes of extreme gravity involving intentional killing. We call on the government to commute their sentences and to reform Singapore's legislation to bring an end to the imposition of the death penalty.
And we need that money by the end of March.
Amnesty said the death penalty has not been proven to be an effective deterrent, while some facing execution, as well as their families, have suffered a range of human rights violations. In an update on ABC News, it is said that Singapore's president, Halima Yacob, has ordered a delay in the execution of the 2 men. The 2 who were convicted of smuggling drugs into the country originally were to be executed on Wednesday. Ravi Madasamy, a member of the law firm handling the case, wrote on Facebook that the president stayed the execution of both men. No other details or reasons were given, and the men would be the first to be executed in Singapore since November 2019.
The Netherlands Prime Minister apologized to Indonesia on Thursday after a study found that the Dutch army used systematic and extreme violence during Indonesia's independence war. Dutch forces burned villages and carried out mass detentions, torture, and executions during the 1945 to 1949 conflict, often with tacit government support, said the 4-year study by Dutch and Indonesian researchers. The findings shattered the long-held official Dutch line that there were only isolated incidents of excessive violence by its forces as the colony it had held for 300 years broke away. And I quote today, on behalf of the Dutch government, I present my deepest excuses to the people of Indonesia for the systematic and extreme violence from the Dutch side in those years, Prime Minister Mark Rutte told a press conference. Rutte said he was also sorry for the subsequent blind eye by various previous Dutch governments. It is not the first apology by the Netherlands to Indonesia, as Dutch King Willem-Alexander formally apologized during a visit to Indonesia in 2020 for excessive violence during the war. But it's the first acknowledgement that there was effectively a deliberate campaign of violence. The study is the latest step in the Netherlands' recent attempts to grapple with its brutal colonial past and wider efforts by former imperial powers around the world.
In other news, Cambodia is delaying an internet gateway that had raised concerns around privacy and free speech, halting its planned midweek implementation due to COVID-19 related disruptions, a government official said Tuesday. Activists and UN rights experts had called for a halt to the project, which will funnel all web traffic through a state-controlled entry point, saying it would have a devastating effect on freedom of expression and privacy. Take a look.
ខ្ញុំយល់ថាការចាប់ខ្លួនខ្ញុំហ្នឹងគឺគេអត់ចង់ឲ្យមានសកម្មភាពដូចជាការបញ្ចេញមតិទៅលើសង្គមទៅលើបញ្ហាផ្សេងៗដែលកើតឡើងហើយមួយទៀតខ្ញុំគិតថាការខាត់ខ្លួនខ្ញុំគឺជាការជះឥទ្ធិពលមួយឬក៏គេហៅថាចាប់ដើម្បីពមៀនដល់អ្នកដទៃអញ្ចឹងបងនៅក្នុងស្រុកខ្មែរសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពក្នុងការបញ្ចេញមតិក្នុងការប្រើប្រាស់សិទ្ធិរបស់ខ្លួននឹងចង់បង្ហាញប្រាប់ឬក៏ផុសឬក៏និយាយអីចឹងទៅគឺមានអារម្មណ៍ថារដ្ឋបិទខ្លាំងមែនទែនគឺពិបាកហើយព្រោះមានបញ្ហាអីតិចគឺចាប់ចោតចាប់ចងអីចឹងទៅអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំយល់ថាវាយើងពិបាកក្នុងការធ្វើមតិអស់ហ្នឹងបង
So it just gives the government more power and more legitimate power to do so in terms of surveillance, and it would increase self-censorship among citizens, among advocates, and we can learn already during the pandemic, online have been quite a important way of communication. It signals us that yes, the government have watched out the power of social media, and the government would want to control the online space as they do so on the offline space. The step that the government have come up with restrictive legislation with the arrest or charge against online user is something adding to what have been happening already. When people express on the street. So the more people become fully aware through social media, the more people engage through social media, it poses the risk for the government. So in order to curb that risk, of course, the control has to be applied.
The implementation of National Internet Gateway will be postponed due to the disruption caused by spreading of COVID-19. So, Visuti, Secretary of State for Telecommunications Ministry, told AFP. The gateway, due to come into effect February 16, appeared to be taking Cambodia down a path beaten by Phnom Penh's major economic partner, China, which keeps the online world behind a great firewall and blocks major Western platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Earlier on Tuesday, the Cambodian Foreign Affairs Department issued a statement attacking foreign media reporting critical of the scheme. A spokesman insisted it was being set up in a transparent manner and that consultations had been held with experts and relevant institutions.
Interpol has issued 2 red notice arrest warrants for a pair of Canadians over the suspected murder of an Indian gangster outside a luxury villa on Thailand's Phuket Island. Jimmy Sly Sandhu, whose nickname comes from a distinctive scar on his face, was gunned down on February 5th after having flown in on a private jet from Malaysia last month, according to Thai police and local media reports. Following a Thai police investigation, Interpol issued non-binding arrest warrants or red notices for Canadian citizens Matthew Leandre Ovide Dupre and Jean-Carl Larcamp, both 36, in connection with Sandhu's murder. The 2 suspects, described by Interpol as armed and dangerous, left Thailand on February 6th, according to the international agency's notice. Police obtained CCTV footage showing 2 unidentified men jumping from bushes near the beachside villa to open fire on Sandhu before fleeing into the night. Interpol also said the suspects taped a GPS device to the victim's car ahead of the shooting. Kemarin Hasiri, commander of the Foreign Affairs Division of the Royal Thai Police, said Thai officers were working with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Meanwhile, police said 9 people were killed and 3 injured in the southern Philippines Saturday when a convoy of SUVs was shot at in an ambush linked to a feud between rival Muslim clans. The attack occurred in a region with a long history of violence and a short drive from where 58 people, including 32 journalists, were murdered in the nation's worst political massacre in 2009. Clan leaders Peges, Mamasainged, and 8 others were killed as they traveled down a farm-lined road in Maguindanao province, according to police. Provincial police spokesman Fayed Kana said both the victims and attackers were led by former commanders of Muslim guerrilla group that waged a bloody decades-long insurgency in the region before a peace agreement was signed in 2014. Authorities are looking for suspects led by Mamasainged's rival, Kana said, adding that 2 families were involved in a long-running blood feud.
We go over to New York, where Joan Soriano speaks with Philippine consul in New York about the absentee voting process. Let's take a look.
In New York, we reached out to the Philippine Consulate General to find out the current status of absentee voting for the upcoming presidential election. Let's hear what they had to say.
First of all, I'd like to limit the discussions to voter registration because we are not yet into the actual voting yet. So as a backgrounder, overseas voting registration for next year's election started in December 2019 and it ended October of this year. And the good news is we had a total of, there was a more than 200% increase of the number of registered voters for next year's elections compared to those who registered for the 2019 elections. It's actually a 205% increase because in 2019, we only had around 4,024 Filipinos who registered as voters. And for this year, we had a total of 8,264. It's more than double. And this is a trend that's usually noticeable when the national elections are for president and vice president.
What steps were taken to ensure good voting turnout despite the pandemic?
We had a very healthy campaign to encourage qualified Filipinos who have not registered yet to register for next year's elections. So we went out to the different states under our jurisdiction during our consular outreach activities. So there are 10 states under our jurisdiction, and we strongly campaigned with the assistance of our Filipino community partners to encourage Filipinos to register as overseas voters. And this would include former Filipinos. We encourage them to reacquire Philippine citizenship and become dual citizens so they may also reacquire their right to vote. And we have had several Saturdays where we kept the consulate open for this specific purpose. And I think that helped boost up the number of new registrants.
No, I agree. And the turnout shows that it worked. And lastly, why do votes of Filipinos overseas count?
Because Philippine policies affect all Filipinos regardless of where you are. And this is one right where each citizen really has the power to decide the future of the country. Because as a citizen, we basically have more or less 2 choices: accept things as they are and do nothing, or try to do something about it and help chart the future, not only for ourselves, but for our children and grandchildren as well. And this can be done through the power of the ballot. And this is why we really encourage all qualified citizens to participate. So registering is the first important step. But the second and more important step is, of course, to go out and vote. Because when you register and you don't vote, then it's really not as effective. So that's the next challenge that we all face, is how to encourage all registered voters to participate. We really do not dictate who they should vote for. We leave them up to their own evaluation and good conscience. But what we do want them to do is, number 1, go out, participate, and vote. And number 2, regardless of who may win, whether this is your candidate or not, to support the new leadership of the country, because that is the only way for us to really move forward and prosper.
Joanne Soriano, Eagle News, New York, New York.
And the news continues here in Asean in Focus after this short break.
Alam namin ang iyong pagsisikap. Dama namin ang iyong mga sakripisyo. Kita namin ang pagharap mo sa bawat pagsubok. Kaya sa kabila ng mga hamon ng buhay, nandito kami para umalalay. Kasi katulad mo, gusto rin namin ang magandang bukas para sa kanya. Hatid namin ang dekalidad na edukasyon at makabagong pasilidad sa abot kayang halaga. Kaya huwag ka na mangamba. Sasamahan ka namin tuparin ang mga pangarap niya. Maaasahan mong sulit dito ang mga pinagsikapan mo. Sa aming mga makabagong pasilidad at sistema ng edukasyon. May lalabas natin ang aking talino at mga kakayahan niya. Kahit sa munting halaga, makakasiguro ka na makakasabay siya sa mabilis na pag-ikot ng mundo. Sa New Era, karamay mo kami sa bawat hamon. Kaagapay mo kami sa bawat hakbang. Kasama mo kami sa bawat ngiti at tagumpay.
Maaalam natin ngayon ang mga kaalaman na natutunan natin sa elementary.
Kumusta ang tulog mo, iho? Okay naman po.
Maling hirit.
Kada magbabayad na sana ako, lagi ka naman sarado. Walang ganon, huwag tayo maglokohan.
Be presentable.
Kung Maria, pasensya na sa ilang mo. Ay, sorry.
Sharing is caring.
Wala bang chicks dyan, mga idol?
Chicks.
Bigyan na natin ng kulay ang buhay. Maling a color.
Why should we hire you? Kasi hiring.
Mismo.
Paano malaman pagbuntis yung aso pag nanganak na?
Funniest nakaball videos.
Welcome back to the program. Asian markets fell Friday following a steep drop on Wall Street fueled by renewed fears that Russia will soon invade Ukraine, according to long-running angst about the Federal Reserve's plans to hike interest rates. While tensions in Eastern Europe continue to absorb most of the attention, oil extended losses as traders grow increasingly optimistic of a deal on Iran's nuclear program that could see it restart crude exports. After a disappointing start to the year, investors are still to get their mojo back as they contend with a range of risk-off issues, including Russia, Ukraine, soaring inflation, imminent rate hikes, supply chain snarls, and China's COVID outbreaks. An analyst warned the uncertainty will likely last for some time. For now, eyes are on the Russia-Ukraine border after Joe Biden warned Vladimir Putin's forces could attack anytime soon. All three main U.S. indices ended well down, with the Nasdaq almost 3% off, though Asia was more muted. Hong Kong, Tokyo, Sydney, Seoul, Singapore, Taipei, Wellington, Manila, and Jakarta slipped, though Shanghai edged up slightly.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo warns of risks to the global economy caused by the crisis in Ukraine as he makes opening remarks at the first G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting in Jakarta. Let's listen in.
Dalam situasi seperti ini, tidak ada satu negara pun yang bisa bangkit sendirian. Semua negara saling terkoneksi. Tidak ada yang terisolasi. Kebangkitan satu kawasan akan membangkitkan kawasan yang lainnya. Sebaliknya, keruntuhan satu kawasan akan ikut meruntuhkan kawasan yang lainnya. Dalam situasi yang seperti ini, bukan saatnya untuk rivalitas. bukan saatnya untuk membuat ketegangan baru yang mengganggu pemulihan dunia, apalagi yang membahayakan keselamatan dunia, sebagaimana yang terjadi di Ukraina saat ini. Saat ini semua pihak harus menghentikan rivalitas dan ketegangan. Kita harus fokus untuk bersinergi, untuk berkolaborasi.
Nice to see you. Good to see you.
Indonesian President Joko Widodo warned of the risks to the global economy of the crisis in Ukraine, where fears are growing that Russia is poised to invade. The threat of a Russian invasion of its ex-Soviet neighbor presents a fresh challenge for a world already struggling to keep a recovery from the coronavirus pandemic on track as inflation surges. Rocketing global inflation will also be in focus at the meeting as central banks begin tightening rates and withdrawing massive stimulus introduced during the pandemic. Other issues on the agenda at the talks, which were originally due to take place in Bali but were moved due to the Omicron virus variant wave, includes debt restructuring for poor countries and reform of global health systems. Construction companies in United Arab Emirates or UAE are very interested to participate in the Build infrastructure program despite the term of President Rodrigo Duterte will end mid-2022. In a radio interview on Wednesday evening, Department of Trade and Industry or DTI Secretary Ramon Lopez said he is confident that the Build program will be continued in the next administration. Thus, foreign investors remain confident to invest in the construction industry. Lopez was in Dubai for an official trip as he graced the Philippines National Day at Expo 2020 Dubai. He also met with high-level officials from the UAE, where they have concluded agreements to further strengthen the economic ties between the two countries. One of the results of the trip is the conclusion of the Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement or IPPA to facilitate investment flow between the Philippines and UAE. Lopez said that with the conclusion of the IPPA or IPA, the next step for the two countries will be the signing of the agreement. The DTI chief added that through the IPA, the Philippines aims to get a good share of investments from the Middle East country, as it has a sovereign wealth fund of around $1.3 trillion.
The 7th ASEAN Economic Community or AEC Dialogue took place online on 17th of February 2022 to discuss the findings and recommendations in the ASEAN Business Sentiment Study 2020-2021, which gauge ongoing sentiment of the ASEAN indigenous enterprises towards the implementation of the AEC Blueprint 2025. Let's watch this.
The establishment of the ASEAN Economic Community, AEC, in 2015 has opened up numerous business opportunities for the regional community with its vision of ASEAN as a single market and production hub characterized by the free flow of goods, services and investments, as well as a more liberal movement of capital and skills. As the AEC continues to mature, opportunities arise for enterprises looking to expand in or into the ASEAN market. As such, regular pulse checks on the integration efforts are crucial to ensure that the targeted objectives are met on timely fashion, as well as identifying challenges that may be a hindrance to achieving the objectives. The ASEAN Secretariat commissioned the ASEAN Business Sentiment Survey 2020-2021 to gather insights on the AEC implementation from the viewpoints of the ASEAN indigenous enterprises, which forms the backbone of the business ASEAN community. This study aims to gather insights and recommendations from ASEAN indigenous enterprises on the following: the perceived impact of ASEAN economic integration under the AEC on their businesses and industries. To delve deeper into the sentiment on services trade liberalization. To understand how ASEAN can further develop and improve regional economic integration. Indigenous enterprises' feedback on AEC implementation was gathered through the following key activities: a survey across 1,115 indigenous enterprises, key informant interview (KII) sessions held with senior leaders of 106 indigenous enterprises, and 29 workshops with 248 representatives from indigenous enterprises, the financial sector, distribution sector, and tourism sector. ASEAN's greater economic integration was driven by the formation of an integrated platform cohesive to offset domestic challenges in most of the AMS. The growth is supported through the Trade Facilitation Strategic Action Plan, which oversees the 7 strategic objectives. Encourage the accelerated implementation of trade facilitation measures which have been accepted by international institutions such as the World Trade Organization, WTO, and/or the World Customs Organization, WCO. Achieve competitive, efficient, and seamless movement of goods within the region to enhance ASEAN's trade and production networks, better participate in global value chains, and establish a highly integrated and cohesive economy. Put in place an effective and responsive regional approach to efficiently address the trade-distorting effect of NTMs with a view to pursuing legitimate policy objectives while reducing cost and time of doing business in ASEAN. Actively engage the private sector with particular emphasis on the development and promotion of micro, small, and medium enterprises, MSMEs. Enhance the institutional coordination among the relevant sectorial bodies of ASEAN to effectively implement the trade facilitation measures under their respective purview, consistently with their sectorial work plans for 2016 to 2025 and the ASEAN Blueprint 2025. Work towards increasing the participation of all AMS, especially the less developed AMS, in the process of implementation of ASEAN trade facilitation programs. Improve the monitoring mechanism for the implementation of trade facilitation measures with a view to increasing their effectiveness and responsiveness in improving the competitiveness of ASEAN industries and businesses. Insights from this study formed 4 key messages. Indigenous enterprises in general have a positive outlook on AEC. They acknowledged the positive impact created through various AEC trade liberalization initiatives which supported their business growth and performance. Majority of the indigenous enterprises are pleased with the current integration level and that they look forward for further enhancement and expansion of the integration initiatives. Indigenous enterprises wish to have better access to the comprehensive information repository of AEC policies and programs. They are poised to support and increase their regional investment participation if they have better comprehension of the prospects and opportunities to be derived through AEC. Indigenous enterprises in their services sector wish to see more improvement in the standardization of regulations and procedures. Enterprises from developed AMS have better advantage compared to the less developed AMS. In general, the ASEAN Economic Community 2025 Consolidated Strategic Action Plan, which was updated in 2018, has stipulated various measures as a follow-up of the ASEAN 2025 agenda. However, the indigenous businesses and stakeholders within the 3 services sectors covered, the follow-through is yet to materialize fully as anticipated. Clear actions are needed by all the stakeholders to achieve further liberalization of trade and service. Most notably, ASEAN enterprises need to be clearly informed on the bilateral level decisions and deals that have been made so that they can action upon it. There are 3 action plans that can be followed up upon by both ASEAN Secretariat and each AMS government, which are strengthening the communication and information flow, streamlining an adequate and effective legal framework, digital facilitation and infrastructure improvement, While good progress has been made, more could be done. The ASEAN Business Sentiment Survey 2020-2021 presents 5 recommendations to further liberalize the trade and services in general across ASEAN. Policy transparency and harmonization of standards and regulation. Improve awareness and understanding on the AEC, AFAS and ATISA. Creation of centralized data sharing platform in digital format. Creation of trade dispute settlement framework and common law transaction. Improvement and standardization of labor and professionals' mobility process across region for ease of travel and cost efficiency. The success of the AEC is highly reliant on the overall intra-ASEAN investment environment for the ASEAN indigenous enterprises. The participation and involvement of the private sector are crucial to creating a solid foundation for the successful implementation of the ASEAN Economic Community, AEC. As such, it is imperative that insights and the result of the study will be taken into consideration and ultimately fed into ASEAN policy-making processes.
And that's all we have for you for today. That is the latest news in the Southeast Asian nations. Stay updated about the ASEAN region. I'm Esther Odanga from Thailand Bureau, and we live in interesting times.
We'll see you back again next week. Stay in the news because we live in interesting times.